All right, we are live. Hey, everybody, it's Sherry Tutkus, the Green Nurse, and welcome to the Green Nurse Podcast, where we bring hope and inspiration for growth and healing. Weed moms, you guys have heard about us. You've heard about us, weed moms. I know you have. I'm a cannabis nurse, a patient, and I would classify myself as a weed mom. I do use this plant medically. I use it as a health and wellness tool. And I also choose to use the plant recreationally on occasion. With national cannabis legalization rolling out across the country, more and more moms are looking for information on how to safely and responsibly use cannabis, known as weed moms. So these trailblazers are breaking down the social stigma surrounding cannabis and parenting, creating a modern culture all their own. So Danielle is a writer covering both cannabis and parenting spaces, and there are many overlaps. She holds a Bachelor's in Arts from Dartmouth College and a Master's in Arts from American University, and has worked as a yoga teacher and trainer, a staff writer, and a researcher on issues of international conflict resolution, which I think is powerful. She lives with her husband and children in the Pacific Northwest, and she has written The Weed Moms, the Canna-Curious Woman's Guide to Healthier Relaxation, Happier Parenting, and Chilling the Fuck Out. So this is, I know, right? So this is the first and only book for mothers celebrating how cannabis can be a safe and healthy way to relax, de-stress, and improve their social lives and relationships. As mothers find themselves on the front line of a societal shift, this book is more timely than ever. So this book is packed with information for both the seasoned and first-time user. This book offers friendly and practical advice. And best of all, I'm quoted in the book. So welcome,
yes, you are.
Welcome to the Green Nurse Podcast, Danielle. I did not say your last name because I didn't want to butcher it. So I was like, is it Simeone?
Oh,
Simone?
that's my middle name, Simone. So it's Danielle Simone Brand.
Okay, Danielle Simone Brand. So welcome to the show. I remember when you first reached out to me months ago, asking about my experience as a mom and a nurse when you first started writing. So I'm very, very, honored to be a part of your story and part of the book that you're bringing about that is so needed for people all over, especially women who are doing it all these days, and so it's, we know as clinicians, as nurses, cannabis is an adaptogen. It helps our body to adapt to stress. But I want to really get into the meat and potatoes of your book and what compelled you to write it. So let's start off with your personal story of becoming interested in cannabis.
All right. Thanks, Jerry. I'm so happy to be here. And so I guess I would start with the fact that I grew up in Hawaii, where there is a strong cannabis culture, and where I wasn't really interested in it, to be honest. It took me until sort of middle adulthood, well, not middle adulthood, but mid to late 30s. I had kids already. Had been married for over 10 years. To actually become interested in cannabis myself. And one reason that I think I didn't really have interest in cannabis before that is because I didn't really understand it. There were so many things about cannabis, especially with the illicit market or the legacy market, where you had really no idea what sort of potency or quality you were getting. You didn't know anything about terpenes. Of course, now we're discovering that terpenes can, probably influence the direction of someone's experience pretty strongly. All these things we didn't know. It was like mystery weed that you would find at a friend's house or somewhere on the illicit market. And I didn't understand it. It had sort of no rhyme or reason to me as to how it affected me. And so so just didn't interest me that much. So fast forward quite a while. Like I said, it really wasn't until I was a mom in my mid to late 30s that I became interested in what cannabis could offer me specifically. And at that moment in my life where I was trying to work, I was raising young children, I was trying to maintain a marriage and social relationships, and it can be really, really stressful, as so many moms know. So the kinds of things that I found eventually that cannabis helped me with were sleep. Oh, such a huge can't underestimate the power of sleep, right? It also became a focusing tool for me in some circumstances because I'm a writer. Microdosing helps me really hone in on a project. So that's another benefit that I found. I found that it was a way that using cannabis judiciously, not judicially, helped me smooth out some of those mood swings that are just really common to women and to moms who are trying to do it all or have it all in this world that is pretty stressful. And I also found that cannabis was something that I enjoy recreationally in a way that helps me relax, helps me tune in, helps me be more fun with my children. But as opposed to alcohol, for instance, that I know a lot of moms do turn to in those evening unwinding moments, cannabis helps me feel better at the moment and better afterward, whereas alcohol does not do that for me and for a lot of people.
Yes, I'll just pipe in as well. We've had that conversation. I think you wrote about that in your book.
I did. Absolutely.
Right? How the endocannabinoid system is affected by everything that we're doing or not doing in our lives. That's good and bad. So alcohol, I hate to shame everyone, no alcohol shaming, because cannabis is really good for hangovers, but alcohol is toxic to all 11 organ systems. It depletes our body of B vitamins, it depletes our body of nutrients, and it's toxic to everything. The minute it hits our lips, alcohol wants to get out of our body. However, on the other hand, cannabinoids support and nourish all 11 organ systems, our immune system, and all of the neurotransmitter messaging signaling systems that give messages to tell our body to either do something or stop doing something. So alcohol downregulates the endocannabinoid system. And so when I'm educating on cannabinoid therapeutics, we produce components in our body like the plant upon demand to keep our body in homeostasis or balance. So drinking alcohol decreases our body's ability to start producing its own internal endogenous cannabinoids. So endocannabinoid deficiency, if you wake up in the morning and you're hungover, let me tell you, that's probably the reason why, right? Is you have a drug nutrient depletion, dehydration. God knows what you ate when you were drinking and what else you may have done. So I always
That's right. That's right. And the mindfulness piece, I know that we'll get to at some point, but that is such an important part of it. I personally, and so many of the other weed moms that I've spoken to, feel so much more conscious and aware when we are partaking of cannabis as opposed to drinking alcohol, which tends to kind of numb people and it blunts out some of those sharper edges, but at the same time, it can make us do things that we don't really mean. Whereas cannabis, it can make us do or say things we don't really mean. Whereas cannabis, to me, makes me even more sensitive, more aware, more empathetic.
More conscious. Okay.
Yes.
Alcohol dampens consciousness. Cannabinoids enhance consciousness.
That's right.
So I'm actually doing a project on spirituality is the root of cannabis care. Right. So when you think about, how we grow, the lotus theory is how post-traumatic growth happens in the mud. The lotus can only bloom when it's in the mud. Right. So very similar type of theory is the roots. We get nourished by the earth, the roots of nourishment of Mother Earth, of the divine feminine. Watering, the sun comes from above, right? And the plant is constantly reaching for the light. So it's very, very similar. We like to try to make that analogy for people so they can understand consciousness is a huge part of healing and a huge part of living a high quality of life, right?
Oh
Truly.
my goodness, so much so. And my previous work as a yoga teacher and trainer really brought that home for me. And so naturally, I wanted to bring that into whatever I did next. And cannabis is a perfect pairing, actually, with yoga, which we can talk about at some point if you want.
Absolutely. Yeah. So back to your personal story, because you were pairing cannabinoids with wellness activities in your life. This is what I'm hearing, correct?
Yes, absolutely. That is how I rediscovered cannabis as an adult and realized that instead of it being, something strange or something, illicit that you would sort of go behind a dumpster to, take a hit of something, that cannabis can truly, truly be an enhancement to mindfulness practice. And I have a meditation practice. every morning. I have kids, so it's not very long, but it's 15 minutes long. And I still practice yoga, even though I'm not teaching currently. I taught yoga for 15 years, including on Capitol Hill. And so absolutely bringing yoga into our self-care activities is incredibly valuable.
Yoga was a big game changer for me as well. Just because of, my illness, having this chronic myofascial pain syndrome. And, it was just easy for me the cannabis helps me to get out of my head and into my body and helps to relax these painful muscles so I could start to move. And what I learned, even through science and research, is out there that, yoga is one of the tools that supports and nourishes the endocannabinoid system because it incorporates 4 very important practices: mindfulness, meditation, movement, and breath work. So it is. And, and then pairing. So you just think about when you pair an activity with cannabinoids to, for the intention of improving the experience, what a wonderful way of having, that's just 5 activities all at once: cannabis, mindfulness, movement, meditation, and breath work. Huge, huge, huge tool all in 1 hour. Call it the hour of power.
Absolutely. And Ganja yoga is growing. Various techniques and teachers are starting to really bring cannabis mindfully into yoga practice because it's a wonderful pairing. There's some, I would say, hangups in the yoga community also about bringing in any kind of mind altering substance, and that's something that I address in the book.
Mm-hmm. What we're doing to decrease stigma around that is the Green Nurse is going to have a weekly yoga class, Wake and Bake, and that's what we're calling it. So, and so people go like, oh, bake. It's not professional. Well, you know what? You bake a cake. You could bake an infused cake. It could be anything. Right. You could bake muffins. So it's just terminology. It's language. And we're even trying to decrease stigma around language when it comes to cannabis.
I agree. And the book being called Weed Mom is something that, it just gets it right out there. Hey, this is about cannabis. We can talk about it in many different ways. There are lots of different
language. That's what it is. The language is so diverse in how people perceive words and what they mean. So, just a classic example with the word high. When my mother first started using cannabis, I don't want to get high. I go, but have you ever been high? And do you know what that feeling feels like to be able to say that you don't want to feel it? The answer was, no, I've never felt it. I said, so you're judging a feeling before you've even experienced it. So that's the thing is, so don't judge the feeling. You can label it whatever you want later, but the goal is to have the experience and to start low and go slow. And we'll go through all of your tips and tricks, but that's the whole point, is to not use the language of the past to define how we're going to be exploring something new and different that we all should be using at this point in time in our lives, for sure. So that's when I teach about cannabis, is that there's 3 ways to use it. It all has to do with your intention and mindset: medically, recreationally, and irresponsibly. So people are like, recreationally, but when it goes into your body, it acts as medicine. I said, of course it does. But if I'm going to be using cannabis medically, I'm going to be using it a lot different than I am if I'm going to be using it to, like you said, write. I'm writing presentations, wrote a chapter in a book. I'm writing, producing media. So do I use cannabis? Of course I do. But what I use is completely different than what I'm going to use if I'm going to sit on the couch and watch Netflix or indulge into a documentary, that I want to really get hyper focused on. So it's truly, it's a tool, and it can be paired with any health and wellness activity or any activity. And it can be utilized in a way that is going to support and nourish that activity. Also, if you have a condition, it's going to help you to enrich that activity even more.
Absolutely. You are speaking my language.
Well, the other thing too, I want to talk about too, because your personal story of becoming interested in cannabis, I love it. It's just, it was on a health and wellness trajectory that brought you to it. You could see how it could pair really well and how it enhanced all of your, I would hate, recreational wellness activities. But your story is unusual because your husband, we had a discussion, you had disclosed that your husband once dealt with cannabis use overuse disorder. So CUD, cannabis overuse disorder, and he actually went to rehab. So would you share that with us, that story? Because just for our viewers that are out there, everyone's like, oh, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. But you know what? I've seen it, and I have patient stories and case studies that I could share. And so we're going to talk to Danielle's going to give us the story of what happened to her husband.
That's right. I tell the story in my book, and it is a very personal story, but at the same time, my husband has graciously allowed me to share it in the book and in interviews. So I tell the story in the book of how almost 5 years ago, my marriage was really at a breaking point. There were many circumstances involved, and it wasn't just his overuse of cannabis, but that was certainly one of them. And it caused a lot of shame for him because he knew he was overusing, and he was also hiding it from me because I was very judgy about his cannabis use prior to my awakening. When I really didn't understand cannabis, and I didn't understand what he, how he benefited from it. His story is a mixed one. He benefited from it in certain ways, and then when he overused it, he stopped benefiting from it. So a bunch of things in our marriage came to light all at once. It was a very painful moment for us. He did go to rehab, and he learned how to recalibrate his relationship to kind of everything. Because when you're overusing something, it's usually because you're medicating for some reason. You have some pain, you have some trauma, you have some things that are unaddressed, and it's the best way to cope. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's what had happened with him. He lacked other tools to be able to cope with the things that, the stresses and the problems that are just endemic to life. And so oddly enough, this was around the time that California, where we lived at the time, California was voting on legalization. I voted yes to legalize cannabis in California when I was living there. And then just a few weeks later, I found out that my husband had been overusing cannabis for a long, long time. And I was like, oh God, great. So that's a funny thing. And then within probably 6 months of him sort of learning how to recalibrate his relationship to cannabis, going through a rehab program, doing therapy, getting on some, a good regimen of medication, he and I had a discussion. We had to sit down together, and I said, you know what? I'm becoming really interested in the wellness possibilities of cannabis. I'm also becoming interested as a writer in cannabis, and I'm getting stories assigned to me that are about cannabis because legalization is happening in so many different places. There's incredible interest and curiosity that the public has about this. So I began writing about it. I began talking about it. And finally, I actually delved into using it myself again. And again, meaning, really for the first time as an adult who understood what I was doing and why I was doing it. So we had to have a lot of conversations at that point around, safety for him, whether it felt like it was healthy for me to be using cannabis in the same household, that sort of thing. Lots and lots of conversations,
right?
Is what ensued there. And really, it's been a wonderful thing for our relationship and for, each of us as individuals. And I can say now happily that he has recalibrated his relationship with cannabis enough that he can partake sometimes. Nice. And he doesn't overuse anymore.
Yeah. So that's nice. You can have an adult use experience together.
We can, finally. And it took a while. There was probably 2 full years where he needed to abstain. That was the healthy thing for him at the moment, to learn some other coping skills.
Yep, reestablish. Mm-hmm. What's the other thing too is when we're working with patients and we doing consultations, doing a mental health checkup. Like we have a detailed mental health intake form when we're doing consultations, because we have found and studies have shown that if someone has really clinically depressed, or they have a high PHQ-9 score, which is a depression screening score, mm-hmm. that using too much THC can actually make their depression worse. So, because, and I know too, I mean, just from my own experience is when my other coping mechanisms don't work, it is easy just to overconsume and just to numb out. Have I done it? Yeah, I have. But then again, too, it's like there's other ways to do it. There's healthier ways to do it. There's healthier choices to make and reaching out for help. So you don't have to keep consuming. And when I get back to educating about that, is that we produce internal endogenous cannabinoids in our body like the plant. So if you're flooding your body with too much THC, guess what happens? Your body goes, oh, thank you so much. I don't need to make any more. So you decrease the amount of your own internal endogenous cannabinoids, the anandamine molecule that's just like the THC molecule. So that is why we are proponents as nurses for microdosing. For microdosing, for stacking, for utilizing cannabinoids in multiple different ways, as a phytobotanical nutrient to nourish and support our endocannabinoid system for homeostasis and balance. Now let's get back to you, Danielle. I always have to get my little educational speech in there.
I love it. Education is so important. And that's really what I want to do with this book, is to help push that conversation forward and to help, to help women, mothers really start to learn about cannabis, to start this potentially lifelong journey, because there's so much to know, as I know there's much, there's always more.
There's always more. So you did research. So you did some research and you researched moms that use cannabis. So what were the top non-medical reasons that moms are using or interested in using cannabis? What was the top non-medical? Because I know the top 3 medical: sleep, pain, anxiety. Those are the 3. But as far as non-medical, what did you come up with?
So here's an interesting thing. What I found in my research, both with weed moms and with experts in cannabis science and cannabis health professionals and historians, even, I did a lot of research and a lot of interviews. What I found is that there is this emerging sort of middle space between medical and recreational use that so many women are gravitating toward. And it's the wellness piece that you referred to earlier. And some people have even called it recreational.
That's funny.
I feel in many ways that many of the moms I interviewed, including myself, really we're saying that we're using it recreationally, but we're nourishing our health and well-being by doing so. So the top reasons are help with mood swings, and that's often hormonal for women of childbearing age. Stress relief, huge. Pain that is not the kind of pain they necessarily would have gotten a prescription for opioids for, but pain that they might take an over-the-counter remedy for, such as headaches or cramps, things like that. And I personally use cannabis to very good effect for hormonal migraines. And then help with anxiety. And I'm not talking about self-medicating without a professional's care for major anxiety, but I am talking about sort of smoothing out those everyday, minor, maybe not every day, but, occasional sort of minor spikes in anxiety. Cannabis used in the right amount, microdosed usually, can give a lot of help there. And then the last one was for low libido and painful sex. So sleep, sex, mood, pain, those are the big ones.
Sleep, sex, mood, pain. So it's great. We did 2 shows in a row with Ashley Manta, just like Santa. Ashley Manta, I think you interviewed her too in your book.
I did.
Yeah, and her, she's the Canna-Sexual, so she has really, really great information on, cannabinoids and increasing women's sexual pleasure for multiple reasons. Her information is fascinating.
Absolutely. I loved interviewing her, and I interviewed another sex educator who uses cannabis as well in her practice, and both of them had so much interesting information.
Ooh, what's her name?
Her name is Carly Jo.
Ooh, Carly Jo, if you're listening, I'm going to get you on the show.
Yeah, she's a lot of fun. And I really enjoyed those conversations. And I love talking to just everyday weed moms who told me all sorts of really fun, amazing things about their changed relationship to their sexuality and their sex lives in long-term relationships when cannabis was introduced. Again, in a mindful way, in a conscious way. It's not about just, getting high and having sex and, not thinking about it, but it's really about enhancing the mood, becoming more sensitive physically, letting go of some of the inhibition.
Sensuality, improving our sensual experience, right?
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. Oh my God, that's so beautiful. So here's another question too. Can you talk about some of the guidelines? Because you wrote some guidelines for responsible cannabis use for moms.
Absolutely. So everyone says this in the cannabis world, and I'm going to repeat it: start low and go slow. That's the very first and most important rule, as I know you know, Sherry. And the second thing is that microdosing is your friend. There's no need, especially in everyday situations or in parenting situations, there's absolutely no need to get stoned, let's say, right? But there's so much enhancement and upliftment that cannabis can provide in measured amounts, in small amounts. And I don't really like the alcohol comparison, but most people can wrap their heads around, what a glass of wine means, or what one beer means, for instance, and how that makes them feel. The way that I talk about microdosing sometimes is to say it's like having, a glass or even half a glass of wine. It's not about drinking a bottle, right?
Right.
So microdosing is really, it's going to alter your perception and your mood in a very subtle way. It's not about changing your personality, completely zoning out, none of that stuff. So start low and go slow. Microdosing is your friend. And really for moms, I talk about all the ways that judicious cannabis use can really help enhance your relationship with your kids. Creativity, pretend play if you have really little ones, all kinds of crafting, coloring, gardening, painting, working with clay can be so engrossing and so much fun with, again, just that very slight alteration of one's endocannabinoid system that, supports our well-being and that supports our ability to engage and be present.
Supports our ability to play, to be grounded, present, mindful, to be with your kids, to enjoy an experience, to bring something to them that they'll remember forever. Collecting rocks, having a rock garden, coloring, hide the Barbie. I can think of all these things. You should play hide the Barbie all over the house. Right?
Exactly. And some of those activities are not always easily accessible when you're in your adult brain, when you're in your get things done mom, working mom brain. It's not always fun to do that stuff. But cannabis for me and for a lot of moms I talk to provides that minute shift, that ability to say, okay, I'm setting aside work brain or, taskmaster brain, and I'm stepping into playful, creative, fun mom side of me. And it really can improve one's relationship and one's playtime with one's kids. So that is absolutely. However, there are certain things that I recommend against. For instance, trying a new product or a new dose. We don't want to do that when we're parenting. We don't want to overconsume, quite obviously. And we don't want to do anything that requires our quick reflexes. I mean, obviously driving, operating machinery, swimming with kids, none of that are good pairings for cannabis, unless you have a sober, another, non-cannabis consuming adult alongside you. But all these low risk activities that we do so much of with our kids, these repetitive things, reading to them, letting them read to us, playing a board game, crafting together, making a snack and sitting and eating it and enjoying it. All these things are just wonderfully paired, in my view, with cannabis.
Completely 100% agree with you. That's awesome. Yeah. And, when we talk a little bit about kids some more, when I first started using cannabis, my kids were 8, 12, and 14. And, when they saw me go from sick and suffering and bedbound to up and moving around in the house and being able to engage in life again. And so I had to figure out how to make cannabis work for me so I wasn't high, and CBD was the game changer that allowed me to consume higher doses of THC to manage my pain. So I didn't, it took a while. That's why I developed the Green Nurse. It took me 2 years to figure out how to make cannabis work for me so I could function daily without feeling high. I needed to learn how to control my experience and control my pain and my symptoms first. Because the goal when you're a patient and you're sick and suffering is you don't want to sick and suffer and make your life worse. So if you overconsume cannabis, it can be completely counterintuitive. Like you wanted to use it for something and then you ended up not using it the way you should have. And then it's like, you just wasted a day. So that's it, right? But
it happens.
It happens. So it's really, it's really learning, how to use the plant in a way that's appropriate for you. And the part that I always like to educate all patients, no matter how they're using it, is your cannabinoid requirements and your response to cannabinoids change over time as you change. So I might, and that's the other thing that's really important. And even if you're an adult use recreational consumer, I recommend that you write stuff down because here's a classic example of me purchasing a product that I was using. I didn't like it. And I gave it away to someone else, didn't write it down, go back to a dispensary 5 months later, bought the same thing, you know.
Journaling is so helpful.
Right.
Absolutely.
So writing was really, really huge. So yeah, so responsible use, all those guidelines. And, when we're working with patients, that's what we ask too. Do you have children? If you do have children, you need to make sure that you keep everything labeled out of the reach of children. You have a discussion with them as you would with any type of medication or alcohol, anything that's, that is hands off. It's the same type of discussion.
Absolutely. And I advocate for padlocking cannabis at home just because, obviously in the pandemic, this is not happening so much, but other kids, would usually come to my house in normal times. And I don't want any child getting a hold of cannabis in my home. So I absolutely padlock my products but that's only one piece of it. Talking to kids is the other piece. And I know we'll get to that eventually, but
yes,
absolutely.
Totally will.
It's a two-pronged approach.
Yep. And then so you said the other thing that you wrote about was beyond responsible use. So that's what I want to go into. What did you mean by that? Beyond responsible use?
So that to me gets to what we were talking about earlier in terms of consciousness and mindfulness. Responsible use is about, it's a little more mechanistic almost. It's like, don't overconsume and know your product and dose and understand your body's endocannabinoid system and your responses to cannabinoids and, consume in responsible situations where you're not, taking care of a toddler, for instance, by yourself. However, that's the first part of it. The second part really gets to, this beyond responsible use is about understanding the effects and potential consequences of what we're doing and really bringing that mindfulness to all of our decisions and knowing that we're making choices, right? Yes, every time we choose to consume or not to consume, that is a choice. And being aware, what are my motivations behind this? What am I seeking? What am I trying to feel? What am I hoping to create? What kind of experience am I hoping to create? And that can vary, absolutely. There are moments when I'm going to consume because I want to have some fun, sexy time with my husband. And that's a different type of consumption than, I need to calm my mind a little bit and focus so that I can accomplish work. Or I want to have some fun with my kids and relax. And so getting to know one's own endocannabinoid system and how, on a changing basis, like you mentioned, we respond to cannabis. So sometimes, over time, our bodies may respond pretty differently, but we can also get to know,
it can be predictable.
It can become predictable if we, if we're mindful, if we keep notes, like you said. So anyway, it's about that conscious and mindful piece. Very much.
Right. So age appropriate conversations about cannabis with kids. Tell me how you had that interaction with your children.
Yeah. So when I first talked to my kids about cannabis, they were probably 4 and 7, and their dad had been to rehab for cannabis. So it was absolutely something we needed to talk about and to address. And besides, we were living in San Diego at the time, and billboards were popping up left and right on the freeways advertising cannabis dispensaries. And I remember my son, my older one, at a certain point saying, "What's cannabis?" Because he could read it on the billboard, right? So it's really, really important to have these conversations and to have them over and over again. It's not the kind of thing, just like conversations about responsible sexuality, responsible sexual behavior. It's not a one and done kind of conversation, right? This is a series of conversations that changes as kids get older, as they mature. And in the book, I break it down from the littlest ones up until teenagers and what kinds of information are important to convey at those different stages. So when my kids were 4 and 7, what I said was, this is a plant. I showed them a picture, I think. This is cannabis. It grows. And it's something that is medicine for some adults. It's something fun and relaxing for other adults. And sometimes people use it for both. But it's also something that affects kids differently than it affects adults. and is not good for your developing brains. It's not good for kids. It's not good, unless under medical supervision. Of course, there are exceptions for CBD use and even THC use in minors, but not recreationally. So, obviously with teenagers, the conversation is going to be a little bit different because I truly believe in harm reduction. And I believe that, I believe in educating and giving lots of information and helping them make healthy decisions. But with little kids, I said, point blank, it's not for kids.
No.
And if you were to use it, you would probably feel sick. We might even have to go to the hospital. I showed them what edibles looked like. And I said, I will always keep these locked up. But if you ever happen to come across them, like it's at a friend's house, this is the symbol, the THC symbol or the pot leaf symbol that indicates it's something that kids shouldn't be eating. And there's more of the conversation too, but that's kind of the nutshell of it. And then, of course, as kids age, and you can speak to this probably really well, the conversation changes quite a lot because if kids are exposed or, young adults are exposed in their social circles, it's, that's something they need to be aware of course.
Yeah. So my kids, when I first started using cannabis, I think I've shared this before, and I had to I created a handbook. Was when I was educating. The terminology can be really abstract. The endocannabinoid system cannot make sense. And I really needed to figure out a way so people could grasp the information in a way that made sense, because plant medicine and using cannabis is so much different than using a pharmaceutical, because you're not reliant on a watch or a clock or a pill bottle or a prescription. It comes in multiple different ways. How you medicate, multiple different ways. There's topicals, tinctures, gummies, edibles, oils, suppositories. I mean, you name it. There's so many different ways to use this plant. And so I wanted them to have the understanding of all of it, because I was going to be experimenting with all of it. That was part of my role as I was a researcher, a nurse researcher, and how am I going to figure out, how can I make this work for me? So, and all of the different ways, tips and tricks, so I can duplicate this and teach other people how to reach new levels of wellness so they don't give up. I knew that this worked. I knew that it worked. I felt it, but I needed to figure out how make it work for me. And that's the road that we take patients down at the Green Nurses is, we'll hold your hand until you're ready to let go. It's not a one size fits all approach. And that's how I taught my children. I said, like you said, every single person is going to respond differently to cannabis. And even your response to a particular product can change over time. So I said, this is something that I would love for you guys to continue to learn. I said, but I don't condone it in children as well, either. And then it comes down to, legal risk reduction, what's important, why are you using it? What the risk benefit ratio. So, we talked about all of these different things. And, the part that I love the best about over time with my girls, at first, what they had said to me, my two girls said to me, Mom, we didn't know that cannabis was cannabis. We didn't know that cannabis was marijuana. Like marijuana, we learned about marijuana in school, and what you taught me or us isn't what we learned in school. And so then that, which really made me open up my eyes to, wow, we have a lot of work to do in society. The whole dare sheet, you wrote about that. Jessie Gill, Marijuana Mommy. Hi, Jessie.
Hi,
she rewrote the dare sheet.
That's
and
right.
then I actually looked at that too with my kids, and we rewrote it together as well. And it's just fascinating to see the reefer madness and how prevalent it is even today, when there is science and research to substantiate it. Just because we didn't learn about it in school, just because they don't teach it in medical school, just because they don't teach it in nursing school, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Absolutely.
And then I'll say that to doctors. Well, there's not enough research. And I said, just because you can't find the research doesn't mean that the research doesn't exist. Because it does.
It does. Oh yeah, I found a lot of it.
Exactly. So it's just basically, I always, so it's all about education. And then, so my girls right now, the part that I really love about it, they're older. One of them's 18, the other one's 21. And, educating them on their brain development, and that how the part of our brain, the amygdala, which is our emotional processing center, is not fully developed until they say between 24 and 26 years old. So I tell them, before you put anything into your body, so they love my little interpretation of the endocannabinoids. They said, listen, health and wellness, every single thing that you do or don't is going to affect how you feel and how this system works. And so then the whole talk about alcohol, they were blown away. So my girls right now choose not to drink alcohol when their friends drink because they've learned.
For an 18 and a 21-year-old. Wow.
Yep. Yeah, I'm pretty impressed. And the part that's interesting too is that they're very curious too. It's really interesting. My daughters will come in and they'll say, "Oh, Mom, omega-3 fish oils, they're great anti-inflammatory. They do this, that, and the other thing. What do you think about getting some?" And I'll pull out a bottle and I'll go, voila.
You mean this?
So that's the part that's just really fun, is that now that they're showing an interest in taking care of their bodies.
That is so important. And I think way more than, absolutes when it comes to teens, at least way more than absolute pronouncements, you must do this or you must not do this. It's about educating them to make good decisions for themselves.
Well, that's it. Cause and effect.
And to notice, exactly, to be mindful of the effects of various activities or substances that they may choose to try at some point in their life, and just being very conscious of that. I do that with my kids when it comes to dessert. I think that you can start in so many ways. When they ask me, "Hey, can I have another cookie?" I say, "How do you feel? Do you think that if you eat another cookie, you'll feel good? Or will you feel, like you've eaten too much?" And they're getting pretty good actually about gauging that.
Oh God.
So that's something that,
that's like my son. My son will be like, "If I eat my broccoli, can I have an extra cookie?" He goes, "It balances it out."
Right. Oh, we do that too, believe me. But really, I think it's so important to teach those internal gauges and internal limits, right? More than it is to impose from the outside.
Okay, so for the moms that are out there watching, we are giving away a book. I'm going to reshare this post. I want you guys to like and share the post and comment shared. And then we're going to put your names in a hat. And then next week I'll announce the winner and you'll get a book. Danielle will send you a book. So Danielle, for new moms that are out there watching, we obviously want them to get your book, because the Weeds Mom book, the link is in the write-up. It's going to help you to navigate the worlds of cannabis and parenting with essential guide for women interested in learning about THC, dispensaries, microdosing, edibles, and how to incorporate it all into a healthy family lifestyle. So for new moms that are on the fence, and what would you give them for advice?
Who are on the fence about wanting to dive into the cannabis world? Well, I'd say
get the book.
There's a lot of information in there, and not just on how to consume, but actually on how to have conversations with the important people in your life about it. Kids, partners, parents, older folks in our lives, friends. As cannabis is becoming, more normalized and certainly more legal in various states as we progress toward full legalization, these conversations are so important. And so absolutely. But I would say really the most basic advice, like I've said already, is if you start low and go slow with very high quality, clean cannabis, there's very little that can go wrong, honestly. If you start very, very low and just pay attention to your body's responses and, be aware, write it down, keep a journal, all that good stuff. It's hard to go wrong. Cannabis is something that supports so many people in so many different parts of their lives.
Yes. So Danielle Brand, she is the author of Weed Mom, the Canna-Curious Woman's Guide to a Healthier Relaxation, Happier Parenting, and Chilling the Fuck Out. This has been a wonderful podcast.
I love that you said the whole thing.
I did. I have to say, well, I'm going to tell you, my business partner, Nurse Mark, he has a book on the Amazon bestseller list. And the title of his book is Absolutely Fucking Amazing, Living the Life You Love.
I love that.
So the F-bomb, I like to say it because it just feels powerful and loving.
I hear you, and I support that. Thank you, Sherry, for having me. I truly had fun and appreciate all that you're doing to educate people, and your work is amazing. You're out there. I see your work almost every day. I come across it in various cannabis circles.
Oh, thank you. And I am so grateful that you wrote this book for moms. I can't wait to get my copy. And remember, everyone, what it is truly all about. It's about living your best life and helping others to do the same. All right.
Namaste.
Namaste.